We appreciate you being here on camera if you are. If not, thank you just for being here and spending your evening with us. We are Agile Denver, so we are nurturing a Agile community in the Front Range over here in Denver, Colorado. But since the pandemic, of course, we have opened up and really enjoying the virtual format and have been able to make friends all over. So thank you to those who are joining outside of our community and within. The links to all of our multiple resources are in the sign-up sheet that I'll show shortly. But we are in the Agile Denver special interest group. And the best place to find out other meetups within our community is to look on our website and to drop down. You can see we have a community in Boulder. We have a Kanban community of practice and Agile Denver at scale meetup as well. So you are here. We will introduce our speakers in just a bit. A few announcements that we have. We're starting to wind down where a lot of our holiday era or holiday timeline, November and December, we kind of go dark a little bit. Some meetups will not have a lot going on, but we do have a lean coffee given by our board of directors. So if you want to join our community and have an open topic venue, that is actually this week, Wednesday. But we're most excited about for folks that are local in our community is our holiday party. So we tried and failed multiple times due to COVID to have our in-person holiday party, but we are going to be meeting in person with, this is our two members of our wonderful board of directors in sumo suits. They will be in person in sumo suit for those who are local to join. We will be treating folks to drinks and snacks. So thanks to those who are able to join or consider, and if you happen to be in the area, please do join us. The last thing I'll say is it's really helpful to know who's here. So I'm going to share a sign-up sheet in our chat multiple times, as well as in the top, you'll see links to some special resources. So the website I just shared is right there. Check us out. We have an awesome Slack channel. If folks are looking for opportunities for employment or to network and connect with the larger Agile Denver community, you can connect with us there. This video will be made available through the Agile Denver YouTube channel. So you can find that there. Usually we turn those around within a month. And so you can share this wonderful talk with your friends. And let's see what else. That's about it. So please do connect with each other on LinkedIn. And if there's anything that we can do, topics you would like to see, we'd love to get your feedback there. So without further ado, we will pretend like the video is not already going and then ask our speakers to introduce themselves. If you don't want to be on video, you can turn off your camera, you can rename, but we do love to make this content available on YouTube later. So, and okay, one more announcement. We are joined by Yolanda Berea, who is going to be my new co-host moving forward. Do you want to just wave and say hi, Yolanda?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Glad to see you here.
Awesome. So folks who are recurring members, you'll start seeing Yolanda at these meetups, and we're so glad for her partnership. Okay, thank you. Brad and Joe, take us away.
Wow, thank you for that. That was quite a setup. So my name is Joe Montalbano. I'm an Agile coach. I'm currently lead Agile coach at CNO Financial Group. I came up as a developer, software architect, project manager back in the pre-Agile days. I've been using Agile in one form or another since about 2005. And this evening, it was billed as yesterday, to tomorrow, and today. The title has changed a little bit. We're going to be showing you Welcome to Human-Centered Agile tonight. So Brad and I have been working together for a while. He is a designer. We've found some methods of bringing human-centered design into your Agile process to maybe get direct user insight without the filter of the product owner. We're going to be talking about that this evening, and then we're going to end the evening with a lean coffee where it will be a user-driven topic discussion about how you are going to engage with your users starting tomorrow. Brad, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Brad Lehman. I have been a user experience person with one title or another for a little over 20 years now. I started out as an interaction designer, have moved into research. I've worked in government contracts, nonprofits, commercial. I'm also a DJ on 94.3 FM here in Tacoma Park, tacomaradio.org if you ever want to hear my show. It's on Tuesday nights here at 10 p.m. Eastern. So thought I'd throw that one in there too. Like Joe mentioned, we have this book that we have been working on for a little while now. It will be coming out soon. We are coming towards the end of our final editing. And tonight, so he mentioned that this was originally called Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. It's built from a previous talk where there's sort of a lot of storytelling about like what are the pain points of HCD and Agile coming together. We're going to cover some of the problems that Agile and HCD, like HCD helps Agile solve. Like we're going to cover some of the why we wrote this book, but we're going to do a little less storytelling on that and a little bit more orienting, especially in the second half of the talk, about what are some of the ideas behind human-centered Agile. There's a lot more operational stuff, applied human-centered Agile that you can find out about in the book. We just wanted to give you some of the basic concepts that help us get up and running with it.
Cool. All right. So Brad, what is human-centered design?
All right. So before we talk about human-centered design, I always like to have just a quick definition of design itself. Design is the intentional creation of an outcome. Anything that you are trying to get someone else to feel, do, experience, that is design. Any decision that you make that is part of that outcome is also design. And that becomes very important as we talk about how teams create designs later, and especially through Agile, where the decisions and particular choices get made. Human-centered design, this is like my rough and ready definition here, it's research plus design. It is incorporating actual user insights into the design process. So back when I was a young designer, I would often get thrown some requirements and be told to make wireframes. And that was design, but there was no research in it. If you are not doing research, if you're not actually talking to users, you are not doing human-centered design. Human-centered design keeps the user in focus as you move through the process. So this is one of the, Joe periodically asked me, why aren't we talking about design thinking? Design thinking starts with a step called empathize. And then, later there's sort of a test and validate. In the process that we're talking about, you're actually going to be moving through several touch points where you have the opportunity and will probably have the desire to talk to users. It can happen throughout the process, not just at key points. I also like to mention that empathize as a step in design thinking is something that a lot of people persuade themselves they can do without talking to users. They just think they know for some reason. It feels a little magical. Research is not magical. You have to actually do it to do it. Empathy is not magical. You have to actually engage people and listen to them. It is human-centered design because we're not tracking just user behaviors, but also their attitudes, their sentiments, their expectations. The attitudes and expectations become really big design inputs in what you're going to make. If you're just tracking behaviors, if you're just doing, say, analytics, you miss out on all of the qualitative stuff that helps you make good decisions about what people want. We use actual users, not user proxies, to gain insight. What this means is your product owner is not your user. The guy that trains your users is not your user. The people actually using your tool to actually do something, they're your users. And the further away you move from them, the further along you get, the less valuable any kinds of insights that you collect can be, because they're being filtered through other interests, other timelines. They're just not They're not coming directly from your user, and they're prone to being much less accurate. And we chose this little yellow brick road here because when Dorothy arrived in Oz, she had a perfect path from beginning to end. It was already laid out for her. It may have been challenging. There were obstacles, but once she started putting one foot in the other, in front of the other, she was going to get where she was going. Teams, product teams, they're not Dorothy. They do not have a perfect path that is going to take them to the right place along the way. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build and light that path by checking in with users and making sure at good points that you are actually moving in the right direction. All right, HCD is more than you think. I don't know how many times every designer you have ever met has heard, let's do some look and feel. Let's add some HCD to it. Let's take what we're already deciding to build and sort of layer on a presentation layer of some sort. Human-centered design, like we said, research and design doesn't really allow you to do that. If you're doing that, if you're just sort of prettying something up, you're not doing human-centered design, you might be doing visual design. You might be doing a little interaction design. But I like to show this just basically to talk about the fact that a lot goes into creating a good experience for someone that isn't just picking the colors on your car.
So you might ask, why do you want to use human-centered design if you've already got Agile? And there's a couple of reasons. Okay, Catherine, I should have checked this at the beginning of the meeting. Can we all, are we all good here? Can we have Vegas rules for tonight?
It's recorded, so whatever you feel.
Oh, so it's quasi Vegas rules. Well, look, I'm going to say the truism anyway, because the truth is that the product owner doesn't always know everything. Now, I got some very good product owners on the line, and I hope that they will not crucify me tomorrow, but they don't know everything. And sometimes what they think they do know is wrong. Human-centered design gives your teams tools to actually, using real data that comes from real users, prove them wrong in those admittedly rare instances where they can be wrong. Helps them fill in gaps in their knowledge where they know they're getting into an area that's uncharted territory.
And yeah, that I think, we talk about them being wrong, but honestly, if a PO doesn't know something and they know they don't know it, they also need the tools for learning. And Agile, just sort of traditional Agile, the one tool for learning is to make the thing and then have actual users use it as a live product. There's sort of some ways around that, but in the end, you're still building it and then giving it to users, and that's how you learn. And that's not always the best way to learn.
Learning is good. We like learning, but we want to learn in the quickest, cheapest way possible. And if building it, fielding it, and getting feedback can be, if you can learn without having to do that, if there's a way to prototype it, paper and pencil, wireframes, sketch, 3D printing. There's a good article today going around LinkedIn about use of 3D printing in Agile prototyping.
I will say maybe I'm the only person here who has been on Agile teams that don't necessarily understand the difference between iterating and incrementing, who somehow managed to find themselves committed to an MVP that is more than just an easily iterated product. Like, it is actually a big complex product that took some time to build, took a lot of expensive developer hours to build. Building something and seeing, especially if you're having MVP drift, if you're having drift towards just the product we want to release rather than an actual test that you can learn from and either improve or even make a pivot away from if you had to. Any of those things, once you get into that level of complexity, build it and see is a really risky way to go.
So lateral thinking is is a design word that basically means let's diverge in our thinking. Let's consider multiple different solution options. Let's consider multiple different ways to deliver the solution. And the whole idea there is that in considering those multiple different solution options, it helps us make sure that we're solving really the right problem and that we've got the right solution for that problem.
Yeah, if you've ever been stuck working on what's sometimes called a founder's feature, or if the thing that is being built was just the first thing that came to a product owner or a leader's mind as the right solution to a problem, or it's being built because it is the thing that the team is most comfortable building, the old if you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Sometimes teams design the solution that they can most conveniently build for themselves. Those are the kinds of problems that you get when you don't have a chance to actually do some lateral thinking and explore the idea that you can solve a problem more than one way. I am not going to use the terrible analogy that people often use for that, involving cats. All right. Solution validation, making sure that you actually have something that is working for people before you throw it out into the world. There are risks if you don't do that. We're going to get to that too. We have a slide called stakes later that we will talk about.
And we want to do this frequently, right? We want to have a cadence to validate our assumptions with real users. Make sure that we're not just building the first thing we could think of, we're really building a thing that scratches their itch.
Yep. And one of the things that's sort of a shift is that code is not the only thing a team can build. Sometimes you can build a model, you can build a cheap prototype, you can do things that will figure out whether users will understand and want the thing that you're about to do before you actually invest a ton of money in doing it.
So we've kind of hit on some concepts here that we're going to come back to in a future slides. Among them are right problem, right solution, and done right. So we have a little bit more on that here.
All right, so if you get nothing out of this, please go read this Medium article by Jen Cordello. I love it. It does not take long. I was pretty good way into my career the first time I saw a double diamond. I'm sure you've all seen some version of the double diamond by now that starts with discovery and ideation on one side and leads to delivery and validation on the other. I never much liked that because it started making me really itch because it skipped what I thought was the lateral thinking part of all this. It was very easy. The link is right in the deck. We can probably grab it for the chat as well. But it was really easy to imagine a team and watch teams, not just imagine teams, start with an idea and they would do the discovery and then they would do some kind of validation on it. But once they had the one idea, they were running with it from one end of the double diamond right to the other. And I really like this framing of right problem, right solution, done right, because it really is hitting at the different points at which you're trying to figure out whether what you're doing is right, not after you've done all of your, there's not just sort of one choke point in the double diamond after you've done a lot of work that is the clear answer. So here, you want to make sure that you are actually addressing specific needs, wants, and that you've checked in on that somehow, that you have a reason to think that you're doing that. That the way that you're doing that is a good answer, that it's actually going to work for people. And then done right, this is, just making sure that whatever version of you've made a good version of it so that users can use it and succeed with it. This is typically where you might do like usability testing, for example.
I really love right problem, right solution, done right. I've been trying to explain it to people for years, and I have come to a point where I think that the best way to kind of frame up why you should make sure you're solving the right problem, why you should make sure you're producing the right solution to that problem, and why it's got to be done right. I think that one of the best ways for me to describe that may be by kind of turning the tables and talking about what happens if you don't do that. So next few slides, we're going to talk about what happens if you do it wrong. So here in pictures is what happens if you solve the wrong problem. Lots of money got spent. Teams have worked countless evenings and weekends, and they're solving the wrong problem.
That dog is perfectly happy sleeping where it was.
So here's an example of the wrong solution. All right, so if the problem was the dog needs a more comfortable place to sleep, I'm not sure that this is it for a whole variety of reasons. And then finally, my favorite, what happens if you get the problem and the solution right, but you do it wrong?
That little dog looks so happy, laughing at the big dog.
He's kind of got a look on his face. I know that something's not right here, but I'm not going to speak up. All right. So there are some, believe it or not, there are some gaps in Agile that if you do not mind the gap, can crush your product like the Wicked Witch of the East. And the first one of those gaps is around discovery, right? So this is what you do with your users, not necessarily with just your product owners, to make sure that you're solving the right problem. What kind of discovery and ideation can you do with them? How can you explore what their needs are? What is, I'd like to say, what is their itch and what will scratch your itch? There are gaps around ideation. How do you find out you're really going to solve the right solution? This goes back to the lateral thinking. How do we consider multiple different solution options rather than just the one that the programmers think that they can program the fastest or the easiest?
So just a quick aside here. When I got started in this field, we did huge requirement cycles at the beginning. We would talk to users. We would write 1,000 shell statements. We would write these detailed books of work that would never, ever, ever end up getting built. And I almost ran screaming from the industry because it was terrible. The technology would change under us, the policy or the budget, something would change. And the thing that you spent months or possibly years working on just became papers on a shelf somewhere. Agile for me solved that by actually preferring to release products, but at a little bit of a cost of some of this time that gets spent actually thinking about, well, how should we be doing this? My first Agile project was a revelation. It was also an incredible amount of work and stress as a designer. And they brought me in because they had tried to do it without design, and they had all these great requirements and stories, and they built the thing as asked for, and it was just an awful, unusable mess. And it was because they didn't really have a good chance to actually sit down and think, okay, here are our problems. What is our range of solutions that we can work with? And ever since then, I have been dying to bring more people into the idea that you can do this stuff without departing from Agile. You can replace what was lost. And so that's where we're going with this.
So before you build it, it's kind of important to do solution validation, right? To find out, how will you know that you have done it right? How will you know before you've spent a lot of time building it that it will resonate with users and that they will adopt your solution? We're going to do solution validation for that. Not everybody does that. That's why we call it a gap in Agile. And if solution validation is a gap in Agile, I mean, honestly, no show of hands here, but just kind of think to yourself, how many of you are really doing solution validation with your teams? If solution validation is something that is sort of a gap in Agile that gets skipped a lot, evaluation is something that really, really, really gets skipped a lot. So once you're done, there is the tendency to, wow, hey, we got that release out of the way and users are using it and it's all good and it's time for happy hour. But there is an important step, which is evaluation. Let's make sure that we got it done right. Let's make sure that, because everything in the wild behaves differently than it does in your lab or on paper, right? Let's make sure that as we've done the release, it really is working as we had hoped and that it is resonating with users and we don't have more homework to do.
Yeah. So the question I always like to ask is, will you know whether you have made a good one or a bad one of whatever you're making? And how will you know that? And too often the answer is just sort of grounded in functionality. If it functions as we expected it to function, that is success. And that sort of ignores the idea that people can fail at using your product, that it can be frustrating, they can succeed, but with frustration, they can, like, there's a whole range of experiences that people can be having. And those experiences tend to have an impact on your business too. Like, these are not just sort of fluffy clouds ideas. When people are frustrated with your product, they look for alternatives. That's just how that works.
Can I just chase a shiny object for a moment? Okay, so at the beginning of the call, we established that I am a safe fanboy. We wanted to make this talk accessible to everyone, whether you're using Scrum, Kanban, XP, Safe, one of the other platforms. I just want to say a word about the continuous delivery pipeline in Safe, right? The 3 infinity loops: continuous exploration, continuous deployment, release on demand. There's a 4th infinity loop there. I think that there should be a 4th infinity loop there, and that is continuous evaluation. And think of it as like a 3-dimensional bracelet that comes right around and touches your continuous exploration. So you go from continuous exploration, from continuous evaluation to continuous exploration. One feeds into the other. And we can talk about that. Anybody else who is a Safe nerd like I am, we can talk about that at the Lean Coffee after this presentation, if you like. All right, human-centered Agile and our good witch.
All right, so now we're shifting from why are we doing this to what will human-centered Agile be about, and why is it going to help? The first, and these are sort of the concepts that orient you to what we're trying to do. I will say just one more plug for the upcoming book, which is that the applied version of a lot of this stuff is in there. There's a lot more detail. We just want to sort of set you up for what the themes are here. The first is that it is a holistic process. So we're not trying to create a lane of work for human-centered design that feeds a lane of work for delivery that creates friction or competing interests. It is applied throughout the Agile workflow. It is not just sort of, here's discovery at the beginning, or here's usability testing in this one spot, or anything else. There are multiple points. You will see what our general life cycle looks like that we end up talking about in the book. It is a stakes-based application of HCD practices. Raise your hand if you've ever thought about doing any kind of discovery at all, any kind of gathering, and heard, we can't boil the ocean, we can't see around every corner, we can't know everything before we start. That is not what we are trying to do here. We are trying to learn enough to move forward confidently and to mitigate risks. And what that means is, like, you have to actually decide which decisions are you making that can hurt you if you get them wrong. And what is the cheapest way to get them wrong and not get hurt? You evaluate the stakes of your choices. You do your research around that. Once you have an idea of what research needs to be done, you align that to your delivery using a research roadmap. This is a very sort of practical part of what we are doing, and it is a way to make sure that as epics, as features or solutions move across, you have an understanding of your overall capabilities and capacity for doing research, that you are, again, moving that money, that investment, into the places where it's going to be valuable, and that you are not moving forward with big things that are risky without actually, like, considering that part of it. It relies on an experimental mindset. You actually need to be able to be wrong. One of the challenges of research as a researcher is sometimes people get the idea that your job is to just show that they are right. Leadership especially is like, when you do your testing, tell me how well my idea did. And that's sort of the idea of it. You actually have to be able to learn some stuff and overturn assumptions once in a while. Otherwise, you're not actually mitigating your risk. And finally, this, as Joe started to mention about continuous evaluation leading back to continuous exploration. Thank you. I've learned some safe along the way too. Is that you are informing strategy. You are not just and as you scale, that scales with you. You're not just doing like product level decision making. You're actually trying to gather user sentiment and in a way that can inform other things that you do. All right, so I said that this is not a dual track. I have been involved in projects where they try to bring in HCD and they do one of two things. They either try to bring in HCD just as a single part of the phase, like, hey, we have something we need to do usability testing, please do that. Or once they hit a certain kind of maturity, they start realizing, well, there are discovery needs, there are usability testing needs, there is evaluation. We're going to create a separate track for that. And the risk of that is that you can sometimes end up with a bunch of people who are doing all the planning and thinking about what you're going to deliver, and then a bunch of mostly other people who are actually doing the delivering. And if you're doing that, you've kind of reinvented big design up front. You've just sort of broken it up into maybe like medium design up front or slightly not as big design up front, because you have one team creating a book of requirements in whatever form, even if it's stories, and then handing them off to be delivered. That has some problems. You end up with, one team trying to create the right experience. I talked about design being the intentional creation of an outcome. Another team trying to ship as quickly as possible. Like their job, as they see it, in this case, is to get the work off their desk, to complete the story, to burn down the points. And it's kind of limiting. The pressure then just becomes on delivery. The PO is usually being measured more on delivery than outcomes. So, one team made some pretty pictures. The other team actually does the code, and the last person to touch something also kind of wins in what the experience will be. So you have some people doing design intent and other people doing design delivery, if you want to think about it that way. And it also just gets harder and harder to have a good stakes-based conversation about when and why do you test anyway.
And this is not what we're talking about. We are talking about a holistic approach, right? So earlier we had the right problem, right solution, done right. Those are very important, by the way, and they resonate with stakeholders. So write them down, take them back to your workplace tomorrow. What we're talking about applies to the whole team, not a subset of the team or a fraction of the team or a whole separate design team that's over here, the whole team. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you got it.
Just say the whole team and the whole problem. So no team ever tasks a team with work. What you're doing is you're trying to get everyone involved in the problem, understanding the problem statement, owning it from beginning to end. So this is what you're trying to solve for. This is the outcome you're trying to generate. Everyone is there dealing with that as their problem from beginning to end.
And we want that whole team focused on the whole outcome. So rather than, as Brad indicated, rather than delivering story points, hey, my team did 20 stories last sprint, we did 37 story point, whatever. How about we measure outcome? And you can start with something basic like the PI objectives that SAFE has in the Program Predictability Index. There are a lot more complex measures that you can put on the outcome, but the important thing is that you start measuring the benefit that this had for your end user rather than output metrics. Number of hours your consultant programmers programmed on it, how big their bill was that month, number of lines of code. Oh, that's one of my favorite. Function point analysis, don't care, only care about user value delivery.
One more thing I would say about this is if you've ever been on a team and are frustrated at the way something finally got released and hear people say like, well, I was responsible for the code, or I was responsible for the design. As a designer, this comes out as I was responsible for the design. The team did something with it, or the developer. I just completed the requirements as they were handed to me. You're not really you're not a holistic team at that point. You have a bunch of people sort of owning specific services within a team, and our goal, our mission here is to get people sort of understanding and solving the same problem together. I will say there was a comment here about this being a common misunderstanding. I will say it's so common, I've almost never experienced dual track any other way. But Catherine brought up a really interesting phrase when we first talked about this with her, which is that there's the idea of this work being time separated and not team separated. And I had not heard that before. I love that. So maybe, if that is already how you are thinking, or already how your teams are thinking, then we're possibly lobbying for a better vocabulary for it, because out where I live in the world of work, it has not worked out that way. It has not been time separated, but team cohesive. There has been a lot of the planning team and the delivery team instead.
And do you want to welcome a question from James now, or wait till the end?
Sure. Well, I think we should wait till the end, especially since we have that time for questions. But if there is someone who doesn't mind capturing some of these questions for that final slide at the very end, I would love to answer them as we go, or as we wrap up.
Yeah, it might be good to get the question captured in the chat.
All right.
And if it's somebody who's got a family commitment or something and they got to drop off and you want to get your question answered, put up your hand and we'll answer it now. Because I get that it's getting late and people do have family obligations.
All right, so here is the phases of design through delivery that we do end up going through in our book. This is what we use. We talk about discovery. We've already talked about that here. Ideation, where we do lateral thinking. Concept validation, where we take competing ideas that teams have created and hopefully done business validation, technical validation, level of effort validation in that ideation space, move into concept validation and actually test them out with users in some light model before you move into building the thing. The more complex the thing is that you are building, the more important it is to actually have this concept validation step, because if you commit to building something that's really expensive and don't test with users until usability testing, you can learn you're building the wrong thing altogether. Feature delivery looks a lot like what an Agilist might be familiar with: refinement, development, with opportunities for solution validation. And finally, evaluation, as Joe talked about. How do you know you made a good one of these? The thing that I imagine is that if you are not used to this, you might look at this and think, oh my goodness, this actually kind of looks a little waterfall again. And the reason that my claim that it is not rests on the fact that you are actually making stakes-based decisions. You are aligning the amount of effort to the amount of risk that you have ahead of you, basically to learn in the fastest way possible what not to do. You are trying to move forward confidently, knowing that you're not about to screw up in the lightest way possible. And so I have been on teams where you can do that with code and MVP and iteration. And I have been on many, many places where that's not actually terribly feasible if you're not building a new product for a small audience, for example, or something else like that. So you want to learn enough to not screw up. You also, at each of these steps, have very specific learning goals. You are not boiling the ocean. You are not trying to learn everything everyone thinks about everything. You are trying to learn very basically Do they understand? Will they want to use, a concept version of what we're doing? Do they understand and will they want to use, the actual version of what we're about to release? Before we even start, like, are we solving a problem someone needs solved? Stuff like that.
All right, well, one of the important things that we want to talk about is the stakes, because I think during the icebreaker, somebody, and I forget who it was talking about that we had a red button and gosh, we want to make it blue right at the very end. One of the things that we want to do before we apply a lot of human-centered design resources to a problem is we want to understand what are the stakes. Not only what is the level of effort, how many people are going to be using it, what kind of marketing or change management do you need to do around it, but quite honestly, what happens if you get it wrong? Is it a new product release that's going to doom you, or is it a minor enhancement to an existing product?
Yeah. Are the people that are going to be using the product, you have a whole lot of new users that you're trying to bring in, you've spent money to advertise something, and this is your big launch. If you have problems at an adoption phase, you might not get a second chance with the people that you are trying to reach. Like that is a risk that you have. If you release something really bad, you can have a reputation. There are risks that you cannot just sort of increment or iterate sort of your way past without a fairly dear cost. One of the things I like to ask in my early planning meetings for solutions is, okay, if we release it and people are unhappy with it and we learn what to do next, is that success or is that failure to you? And either answer can be correct. It's just always one or the other. Like if you learn that you made a whole bunch of mistakes and you can iterate and no one really minds for whatever reason, you don't need to do a lot of research. If those mistakes are going to cost you customers, if they're going to cost your boss a job, if they're going to cost someone a contract, like there are all kinds of considerations about what sorts of stakes will demand that you actually do a little bit more research and risk mitigation up front. Finally, we have a bullet on here for experience decline, which is just that as products mature and new features get thought of and added, one of the risks people don't always think about is just product drift or experience drift, where things get crowded or good ideas make basic products harder and harder to use.
Before I go to the next slide, I want to do a time check. It is 8:46 Eastern time. In 14 minutes or sooner, we're going to be switching our focus. We're going to be pivoting to the lean coffee portion of this presentation, where it will be a lot more interactive. I see that there are some good questions that are starting to pop up.
So many good questions.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about all of them. All right, first we're going to talk about the research roadmap.
All right, so most roadmaps, please forgive the fact that we don't have the idea of epics and stories here, but most roadmaps look like what is the top lane here. You have epics, you have stories, you refine them, they go into development, out pops a product on the other side. We are suggesting work in other places here. And the way that we do that, we get more into the details of this, is we have a research roadmap that aligns to the delivery roadmap, or to the product roadmap that you're kind of used to. One of the reasons we do that is so that at a product or a program or whatever level you can actually see which things have had research validate them, which things have not, that you can have clear discussions about the stakes if you are scaling up at all and you have research teams or are making allocation decisions about who's doing what to learn. You can really get a sense of what products, what features actually need that research, and you can plan them. You can actually figure out how much time you have to do this, how much time ahead. Having a research roadmap really gives you the opportunity to do all this work without slowing your development teams down. If you are slowing your development teams down, it means that you have probably missed out on a little bit of a window of opportunity between when you first thought you might want to do something and when it's actually getting worked on by your team. Joe? Yeah.
All right, so if you pick up the PDF, this is the one image that didn't make it into the PDF. I'm not sure why. I tried to export it a couple of times. It doesn't like Beaker with his experiment. But we think experiments are really important. And I love the quote from Jeff Gothel. HCD tools give teams the tools they need to prove leadership wrong or to prove the product owner wrong. Doesn't happen often. Certainly not with the product owners that are on the call tonight. But it could hypothetically in some universe happen. So how many of you experience this? How many of you go into a sprint demo where work is demoed and stakeholders are there, but there's not really a lot of feedback collected, or there's feedback or sentiment or insight collected from the stakeholders that are at the demo, but it's not really iterated on, it's not really acted on, it's not used as a decision point, it doesn't inform further development from the team. Does that ever happen to anybody? Almost nobody's on camera, so I can't see if you raise your hand. But that's okay. It happens. It's happened to me. It happened. Oh, wait a minute. There's people raising. Oh, awesome. I love this. So thank you for that. So, some of my CNO colleagues as well. I love that. The idea is that we want this learning, especially at a demo, to inform the next steps. Does that mean a pivot or persevere decision? Possibly. Does it mean doing a little bit more of this and less of that? Possibly. But like, why do the demo if what you just did is not considered an experiment that you can learn from and grow from? What we're trying to articulate with the idea of human-centered Agile is we want to bring that learning upstream. We want to have intentional goals around learning. We want to shift them left and do them a lot earlier in the process to maybe be a little bit faster or a little bit less expensive. We want to learn in the cheapest, fastest way possible. And at the risk of going off on a rant here, I want to talk about failing fast, because that's not what we're talking about. We don't want you to fail fast, because we don't want you to fail. And we think that anytime that the team learns something, whether it's something about the technology and maybe technology limitations, or maybe it's something about your user preferences and attitudes, if you learned something from your experiment, it wasn't a failure. So my request of executives and leaders is stop using the phrase failing fast, because it's got the word fail in it. So like you don't want to create this environment of psychological unsafety for your teams where they're thinking, oh, well, if we don't have the desired outcome here, it's going to be considered a failure. We don't want that. It's not a failure. It is a learning opportunity. All right, so we have some factors for success with human-centered Agile.
Right, and I'm gonna be honest, this came from me pre-human-centered Agile. This is just factors of success for any kind of integration of HCD with Agile. So if you were not where we are with this, but are still like interested in bringing human-centered design into Agile projects, here's what you need to know. Here are the things that lead to success. First, you need an engaged product owner. I have never, and this is just Agile across the board, I have never found a solution for a walk-away product owner. You end up with a lot of, well, that's not really what I meant, or worse, what we lovingly call the executive swoop and poop, which is, we did everything that we agreed and set out to do, and it just wasn't happening for the person that needs to approve it at the end. You want your HCD practitioners integrated into all of your Agile events and ceremonies. Do we even still say ceremonies? I can't remember whether the terminology on that one flipped.
So SAFE uses ceremonies. I think the Scrum Guide has moved to events.
Okay.
Either one is fine.
But you want to be at stand-ups, you want to be at retros, you want to be at sprint planning. You do not want your HCD practitioners treated like a service desk, because it will get really hard to actually get everyone facing the same problem. Time to incorporate findings. So here is a classic, what Joe would call an anti-pattern is, sprint 8, you actually do user interviews or you do usability testing. Sprint 9, you are doing all of the changes that came out of that. And actually, in order to hear from users, to boil them down into insights, to change the stories or change the work that you're going to do, it actually does take a little time. Maybe not like there are small, fast things that you can do, but a lot of the work you can't do it on Tuesday and then have the developer start on Wednesday. Permission to, and we put this in quotes again, permission to fail, by which we mean permission to disprove assumptions. If you cannot actually change the course of things based on what you learn, you might as well not be learning. And finally, product success metrics that are tied to user attitudes. How do we know if we made a good one? If you don't know how to answer that question, or if your only answer to that question is we did it on time, or it met the AC, then you are going to really struggle because you're not actually hearing from users. You're not finding out whether the thing that you meant to do is the thing that you did, whether you did it well or not.
Well said. So the problem with a talk like this is that Brad and I could talk like this all night, but what we want to do is we want to stop talking now, and I'm going to move to the lean coffee portion. I'm going to put a link to the mural in, well, let's see, I'm going to try to put a link to the mural in the meeting chat. And I'm going to invite you all to join the mural and to maybe ask some of the questions. You can write it on a sticky note. Quite honestly, we've got about 35 minutes. It depends on how many questions we have. We could do, if we get a whole big landslide, we'll do dot voting, but we're probably not going to get a whole big landslide. Oh, okay. So I see people are starting to join now. I'm going to invite everybody to follow me so that you will see where we are on the. All right, so now everybody's cursor should be taken to the Lane Coffee. Grab a sticky note and write your question, or write what you want to talk about. Maybe it's an observation. Maybe it's a success story about how you are engaging with your users. We'd love to hear that. If folks are doing focus groups or open studios, office hours, or whatever with actual end users, please grab a sticky and tell us about it.
While we're doing that, I'm kind of scrolling through the questions in the chat. I'm going to start answering them from, I want to say, the Alan Thomas question at 8:39, because I think we hit most of the questions prior to that. And Alan asked, how do you avoid great user-centered designs that cannot be implemented or that exceed cost or schedule? So the first part of that has to do with that holistic approach. You start with the problem. You start with the same people in the team. Joe?
I apologize. Are folks finding that they can't edit the mural?
Correct. I think we all need edit access.
Yeah, it's you only.
Fratza. All right, give me 1 second.
Yeah, anyone with visitor link there, you want to make that edit.
Oh, are you kidding me? Oh,
all right.
no.
Who designed this anyway?
Okay, so we're going to go to Plan B, and we are going to ask you to, in the meeting chat, go ahead and enter your topic, your question or your topic that you would like discussed, and we will do it from the meeting chat. I apologize about this, folks.
This is the risk of not doing solution validation.
Touche. Also the risk of using the free version of the tool.
All right, so how you avoid great user-centered concepts. So first of all, you get everyone on the same page about what the problem is. During the ideation session, because you have the whole team in the room, you have devs, tech lead, you have business analysts, you have product and basic business representatives. During ideation, you should be able to do, even if it's t-shirt sizing, some rough set of estimation around what the range of acceptable solutions are. So if if my problem is I want to get to work every morning and my range of solutions is I can either get a bus pass, or I can get a bicycle, or I can get, a car, and someone says, no, you can't get a car, we don't have the budget for that. That's a constraint that you should know during ideation. And one of the reasons you should know it is that the people doing this are there to actually check in with that. Does that answer the question well enough?
Were you answering how do you validate without data?
No, I was answering how do you avoid great designs that can't be implemented. Basically, another way that I've sometimes heard this is like, how do you avoid gold plating? How do you avoid over engineering? It's a really good question, and it's one of those. It's especially a challenge if you have sort of one team doing the design and another sort of off, like it's going to get thrown over a transom somewhere. You don't want that. You want someone to be able to say these, like, you are moving outside of your constraints during the ideation phase. All right.
Yeah, I think to answer the question, it just, it gets complicated and messy in practice.
It absolutely does. But yeah, no, I think being able to have the interests all sort of represented throughout the process, really, like, I don't mean to be glib about this. It really is easier if you can start with what your actual constraints are. And designers, like, they can deal with that. Like, the constraints make design. It's a truism. All right, how can we help the PO be properly measured on quality rather than rush delivery? Let me tackle the first part of that, and then I'll let Joe tackle the would SAFe help prevent that part of the question. So usually at discovery, at kickoff, when you start with your problem definition, and we do talk about this in the book, when you start with your problem definition, one of the things that you should be doing at that point is figuring out how you're going to measure success. And that is a standard early point. You're creating a specific outcome, you're creating a specific experience. How will you know whether you made a good one is a question that you actually need to ask at the front of the process. And then that becomes the information that you radiate throughout the process. It's part of the problem definition, is we're going to be measured this way. And that's why I have that as one of the factors of success. If you don't do that, you are only going to be measured on rush delivery. You're only going to be measured on how quickly the thing that you said you would build got built, and not whether it's any good or not.
And I hate to keep coming back to SAFe, really I do, but SAFe makes a big deal about, oh, okay, you're right. SAFe makes a big deal about the importance of lean agile leadership, and the idea that if your executives aren't on board, you're going to have a really troubled agile implementation. And I think a lot of it is at the beginning of a product launch, project, any activity. You kind of want to make sure that you have alignment with that executive on, okay, what do we want to do here? Is the idea just about the bottom line, or is the idea about creating delight on the part of our users? And that needs to be a conversation and a negotiation between product owners, product managers, and executives at the beginning before it gets kicked off. I see Chris Lauer has written insight repositories.
Yes. It's not a question, but it's a great idea.
Well, I'm sure that it was written in, I'm sure we used the word talking about how do you collect and aggregate all of the data that you've got. You've done all of these discovery sessions, these ideation sessions, these validation sessions. What do you do with it? Where do you put it so that it is accessible to the teams? And how do you keep it updated? Because that stuff goes bad faster than fish.
So some of it does, some of it doesn't. I think how long an insight lasts, how durable it is pretty variable and is specific to the kind of thing that you're learning. One of the challenges for people that have done UX research is that you may end up doing usability testing on a specific feature. And whenever you are learning, I talk about discovery, concept validation, solution validation. But whenever you are learning at least a little bit of everything. You are learning attitudes and sentiments in general because people tell you. You are learning, what they want. So what you want to do is you want to capture those insights in a way that isn't just helping you make a decision on a product. You want them to be available to the team. Insight repositories is that answer. I don't have a specific tool, like I'm not here selling a tool, but the idea is that you take your insights down to sort of an atomic and thematic level. Most of the tools that I've used in the past allow for tagging, allow for, being able to track where did it come from? Where did this insight come from? How did we learn it? What was our learning goal? What product does it apply to? When did it happen? Methodology, stuff like that. At my current project, we do use a tool called Dovetail, which lets you do all kinds of tagging. And as our research body has grown, it's really easy to investigate. What did people say about this kind of problem or that kind of solution? I cannot speak enough about how once you start moving past a single team working on a single product, you really do want to start thinking about how you're going to build your repositories.
I just want to add that the learning that you do is not restricted to users, their attitudes, preferences, and priorities, but it can also be about the technology you're using or the constraints thereof. Hey, gosh, what we learned about this new technology is that it's really hard to do X, or that, if we can do Y, maybe that is a workaround for X.
Yeah.
Hey, we've got good questions here from Aaron and from Jason Beheeler. I'm a little bit prejudiced because I work with Jason and he works in this space. And Jason's question is, may have missed it, but would UX designers say they are currently doing human-centered design? How to deal with the current UX paradigm? Brad, that's all you.
So I think I would need to have a shared understanding of what we consider the current UX paradigm. I can speak more easily to the first part. Are they doing human-centered design? Some are, some are not. I have worked in places where the design is being told to make wireframes. Like, here are the requirements, make me a picture of what it will look like. Or it is being told to improve something that is already going to get built. Add look and feel. I told Joe, one of the things I say is you can't, as a designer, I can't do HCD any more than a developer can do a DevOps. If you aren't doing research, you aren't doing HCD, you are, slinging screens of some sort. That's the question is, are you talking to users? And when you talk to users, do you have the opportunity to build your findings into the product that is going to get released? If you are, you're doing human-centered design. If you aren't, you aren't.
Jason, does that answer your question, or do you have threads that you still want to pull on that?
No, I think that helps. I think we're definitely in the wireframe camp.
For sure.
Yeah, and I think we assume that the UX designers, they're experts, and therefore we don't have to talk to users because the experts know what the users, or anticipate what the users need. And I think that's the difference here that we're talking about, is that's a big assumption leap.
And most people in UX will tell you, if you buy them a drink at the bar or something, that one of the first things everyone learns is you are not the user. This is like a truism in the profession. The sooner that you can understand that you are not designing for yourself, the better a designer you're going to be. And the only way to learn what users actually want is to talk to them. So yeah, it's what a designer can give you without talking to users is they can give you best practices, they can give you some heuristic evaluations, they can give you their gut feel. And I can say, having been a designer for 20 years, my gut feel is pretty good. I always learn something I don't expect when I end up talking to users. Always. It's just without fail. No matter how great I thought my design was before, I end up changing it because I learned something.
Got it. Thanks.
Do
Thank you.
either of you have a point of view on hypothesis-driven development and HCD coexisting?
Yeah, I want to learn more about this. So
Yeah, I do too.
Aaron, engage in a conversation with us, please. Tell us about hypothesis-driven development.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I have to function on camera while I'm watching the Eagle game right now too. Sorry, I'm not 100% focused.
Multitasking.
We can bring you back in. You asked a great question, and we want to hear more about.
At least I'm not like cleaning my kitchen, which sometimes I do on these calls. So, I assume, most people have sort of an understanding of this, or no? It's basically taking, problem, solution, hypotheses, processes, and building really like a flow chart or fishbone, whatever the necessary tool is to get you through from observation to determine if a problem is worth solving, and then be able to have some type of quantification of that, and in essence be able to justify it. So that's like extremely, and then be able to measure that, obviously. So measure and test it. So everything isn't just sort of general corporate assumptions. That's my extremely oversimplification of it in 45 seconds.
Well, given that that's the extent that I know about hypothesis.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you might have known more about that.
Well, no, I appreciate you taking time and making me smarter. It sounds to me like you can't do that without HCD, right? How can you test your hypotheses without engaging with your users, measuring their level of satisfaction, frustration? Were they able to complete the task? How many tries did it take them? What was their frustration level at the end?
Yeah. I think there's some just from the sound of it, and I have a homework assignment now. But just from the sound of it, it sounds like there's natural partnership and agreement points to be found. I imagine that the things that you can test doing this might be a little bit different than the things that you would test with HCD. And that's where the difference might be, but I don't see why they shouldn't be compatible.
Yep. Okay. I'll put something in here if you're interested in a little more. And there's a guy that wrote a book, Alex Cohen, for anyone that wants to nerd out on it.
We would love that.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not an expert. It's just something I've used over the years. It's been, I think the nice thing about it is it brings a version of sort of, scientific attempt at scientific analysis as part of the process. I think that's, it's different that way. I found that it tends to anchor conversations with people who can wobble in leadership. Anyway, sorry, I didn't want to go off the.
No, that's great.
This was great. This is exactly what we hope to get out of this. Before we move to the next question, question for the facilitators. There was a question earlier up in the chat about how the PDFs would be distributed, or where people can go to get them.
Yes. So at the top of our sign-up sheet, we have a link to a Google Drive folder where the PDF is located. So I will also Sorry, it's at the bottom. I'll also paste it here for folks looking for that. And it's in the document as well as a captured list of our questions. So you now all have it, and the link is in the sign-up sheet, which you also have access to.
Cool. So Cam has a detailed question, and I invite Cam to unmute and engage in a conversation if you like. Are there any special considerations when applying HCD to a chunk of value, aka a release, or is HCD at the feature level transitive? Is a release that is built on features that have had the HCD light shown upon them greater than the sum of its parts? Wow, this is deep stuff. And we have trouble building these chunks of features, specifically when it comes to the communicating the value to users.
All right, so let's take this in parts here, because there are a few questions. The first is, if you are measuring chunks of value, is that good enough, or do you actually need to like keep the product or whatever your experience, if you're doing something that is not exact, is a service, or you're doing service design or anything like that, do you need to keep that in mind? The answer is absolutely, you need to be doing some product level evaluation. You should, that goes back to that idea of continuous evaluation that Joe talked about. So I release features A through D, and then I release features E through H. And even if individual features tested out well in sort of their own little box, you can end up with, I think we had it on the stake slide, but it's basically experience decay or experience drift, where it starts to become harder for users to use a product because it's getting crowded, or because the point of it is getting lost, or it's getting harder to understand where and what to do. So absolutely do recommend that there is some product level evaluation that happens on a periodic basis. Feature level is not enough, but it is good for features. I mean, you know, and this is, again, becomes that stakes conversation. As you spend a lot of money building features, how do you know you're doing well for your product overall, and when is it worth testing? You can make a lot of good decisions and still end up in a bad place if you're not checking back in. All right. So I think that is kind of the first two questions. We have trouble building chunks of features when it comes to communicating the value to users. So that's a really interesting point that I am very tempted to hear more about. But I think if you are trying to communicate the value to users, either you're having something fail in the experience, in the wayfinding or the orienting, or something that the user should know about it, as they come to it, or you're having literally a communications problem, and I'm not sure which.
Yeah, I think it comes more down to the road mapping exercise of understanding which of these features that we've communicated to users and have had user engagement with through this evaluation process, the discovery, and then bundling those together, and being able to say, hey, here's a chunk of work, but it's got a lot of different themes going on in it, right? So whatever, we end up in a lot of situations where features will get completed in the PI and they'll be ready to go into the release. We get them through the IA and everything looks good, but you get this sort of disjointed grouping of features that is a little bit difficult to really comprehend if it's the first time some of our users are looking at it. They'll understand, obviously. We do have users involved in it, but that the chunk at the end of a PI and that sometimes ends up just being kind of disparate features that are difficult to tie together in concise release notes or in the 5-minute conversation you have with somebody. So that's kind of the question of, if you apply the human-centered design to the release level and create something of a more, or use those considerations to create more of a coherent chunk of value in those features.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a real opportunity to do that. And that the thing that might end up getting fixed when you do that is more along the lines of information architecture. Like, are you pulling attention in the right places, in the right order? Like, all these features were great, but are they equally valuable, or are some, is the way that they get used different? Is the expectation of where to find them different? How can you actually go back with users and check, like, yes, I knew where to look for your chat feature, and I also knew where to look for my settings, and I also knew where to look for these other things, and it actually made sense to me. Or I just didn't know what I was looking at on the page. And there are specific HCD tests for stuff like that. You can do impression tests and make sure people understand this is what this product is for. This is what this page is for. These are the things that I can do. You can do like first click kind of tests to see where people's attention is driving them. All right, what is the best way to talk to users? It's a really open-ended one. I hate to give the
and talk is in quotes. So,
Talk is in quotes.
I think the intent of the question is communicate. Courtney, do you want to pull the thread on that a little bit?
I'm newer to the field, so it's a broad question on purpose, mostly just to start understanding how, from your perspective, is the best way to communicate with your users. And if I'm sure it's specific to whatever project you're working on, but is it often a two-way street? It sounds like it's happening all the time is what you've been talking about. And is there, I'm trying to imagine just, calling up a user and getting them to tell you, but what's the best way you tend to do this?
That's actually, that is not a terrible idea. So at my last job, we had a program where the teams would have a story every sprint. Talk to a user. Period. That's it. Talk to a user. Stop them in the hallway, give them a call, go out to where their portion of the building, sit with them. This is back in the pre-COVID days, and just engage with them. Obviously, there are structured techniques. There are collaborative discovery workshops, ideation workshops, and I like the lightest weight, most informal thing possible.
I'm gonna take the opportunity to give you like 5 different answers to one question. So the first answer is that the best way to talk to users probably depends on what your learning goal is. So, some learning goals, there are like really clear methods. If you want to find out whether users can use a product that you're about to release, you do a classic usability test. The usability test is the way that you're going to do it. There was another question about like how many people you do this with, and 8 to 12 has always been sort of a magic number for like just a basic usability test, getting where you start edging into diminishing returns by the end of it and understanding, at least at a qualitative level, what people do. If you're looking for discovery level stuff, interviews are classic, one-on-one sit downs of like, and you can use whatever framework you like, jobs to be done, or just sort of any kind of open discussion of like, why do you, what might you want? How might we, solve this for you? You might need quantitative methods to answer some questions. How often, how tricky, how, there are other ways to hear from users. So that's answer 1. Answer 2, the UXer in me always wants to aim, or at least wants people to understand fidelity of communication. So if I am sitting in a room with you, watching you use the product that I made in the context that you'd be using it, I am getting the highest fidelity understanding of what you're doing. This is called contextual inquiry. Let's say I worked for TurboTax. I want to actually watch you actually file your taxes and see where you get stuck and where you don't. Then, doing something in a lab is a little lower fidelity. And then doing something remotely over Zoom is a little lower fidelity. And then having a phone call where you walk me, like, there's the fidelity of the experience. And you can see that in almost any technique where, the further away you get from someone and what they're doing, whether it's by time, whether it's by distance, whether it's by mediating devices, the harder it is as a researcher to understand what someone's going through. And finally, you said, can you just call them up? Recruiting is a can of worms, man. Recruiting is its own topic altogether. I do a lot of government work, which means that I can't just offer people like gift cards and win them into my presence the way that a lot of people do. But that is like a really classic way. Give away some gift cards and get people's time that way. You often have devoted users. I'm a big believer in sort of voice of the customer programs that actually start to investigate, like, how does help desk, what are they hearing from people? How else can you collect what people are telling you besides necessarily just going out and talking to them? I think there's a lot of room for thinking about how to do that.
All right, let's try to take 2 more questions. Next up, we have, is there a recommended size of users to talk to and validate product features, either at the early stage prior to an MVP or late stage and final validation?
And again, it depends on what your learning goal is, but usability tests, I sort of set out a number of 8 to 12. If you're basically doing a task completion test where, it's fairly bounded. If you're doing something more exploratory, you might need more people. You can, there's no exactly right or wrong number, but I will say you'll know that you are hitting diminishing returns when you start recognizing the pattern and frequency of what you're hearing in a good way. So, once you start feeling like, oh, okay, we talked to 12 people and we heard this thing 7 times and that thing 3 times and that thing 1 time, you're gonna start getting a sense of the shape of the response. And you'll know whether you need to hear from more people too. Or you might find like someone raises a concern that becomes its own learning goal. Like, we only heard this from 1 or 2 people, but it sounded like it could really be a problem. Let's set a learning goal around really understanding that a little bit better. And then that becomes its own little research effort, depending, again, on the stakes. Like, how risky is it if you get it wrong?
All right, last question. And do we still have, yes, Jason is still on the line. So Jason's question, and I think Brad is going to answer it very differently from the way I would answer it.
I'm going to go ahead and have you just answer this.
I'm attempting to encourage teams to build telemetry into their solutions to understand real-time user behavior insights. Curious if you can provide an example of a great telemetry implementation. So the key part of Jason's question is to understand real-time user behavior insights, right? Most of the time when we implement telemetry, it's to do things like tell us when the database is down, tell us, what is the click path, what is the dwell time, how long do we spend on this page, how often do we come back to this page, what was the error. We'll build in things that will allow us, our development teams, to replay the actual actions that users were taking in production right before things went wrong. That's not what Jason is asking in this question. Jason is asking about how can we use telemetry to get user insights. So it's something that I have a little bit less experience with, but it would be rather than using telemetry to tell you in advance, when the database died, rather than having people call up the help desk. Hey, how long do users spend on this page? Are they able to accomplish the task that they came there for? How often do they have to come back to it? Can we use telemetry in a way that lets us know, hey, maybe they're coming back to this page again and again. It's because the result that they got maybe wasn't right. Maybe there is some clicking behavior that indicates that they're looking for something. They're trying to discover functionality and they're having issues with it. That could be an indicator.
So I think I was stuck on telemetry as a term because a lot of the stuff you're talking about, Joe, I sort of bucket in my mental model as analytics and like, how would you use analytics? And the thing that I would say with analytics is what I would say with our other stuff, which is the best way to do it is to set out your learning goal first, and then try to figure out how you can learn that through the data that's available to you. The thing that I see over and over again is that people just sort of want to, I don't know, stare at data and have an insight emerge from sort of exploration and osmosis. And I think if, if you're thinking analytics, start with the question, then figure out how to find out the answer, rather than just starting at the data and hoping that an idea presents itself to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Brad and Joe. And I hope thank you everyone else for joining and spending your evening with us. I hope you found this valuable. If our audience here wants to learn more about you, Brad, or buy your book, how can they learn more or connect with you?
Feel free to find me on LinkedIn, Brad Lehman. If you search for SAFE, you'll probably find me. As Joe and I did end up becoming SAFE contributors.
You can go on LinkedIn. If you're having any trouble finding us, you can go to the Scaled Agile Framework site. You can type HCD in the search bar, read our article, and I think links to our LinkedIn profile are on that article.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
It's a pleasure being here. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you all.
Same. Great questions. Great.